I will record tonight's session as well, if that's okay. If you can just accept that, would be great. So yeah, it's interesting. You talked about experiences of this kind of topic around micromanagement versus coaching, Chris. I'll share. I've got a number of experiences, but my most recent one was when I was a business leader in 3M, and I was managing a very large division of 3M, and I reported to the local kind of country business leader, or business director. And it was fascinating because I had a guy that I worked for, and I'm pretty sure it was micromanagement, but it came under a different guise. What he did was, we were in a very difficult market. So it was a medical business. We were selling to the NHS. There were some really difficult market headwinds. And we had so many differing priorities and so much going on that I think probably, that one of the big problems was that it was very difficult to know what to do. So the way that he handled that situation was he was constantly making demands for data, reporting, projections, business modeling. If we did this, what would that look like? If we do nothing, what would that look like? And it literally had my team, my leadership team, it had us kind of almost in a state of paralysis, because we would go through a cycle. It'd have me working with financial controllers, my team working with financial controllers. Well, what happens if this impact happens? And we'd be going, well, that's unlikely in this. I don't care. I want to see it modeled. So we'd have to build out a business model based on one projection. Then that would come back and say, well, what if this happens? And it was weird, because we had a really clear plan about what we were trying to achieve, and he would not sign off anything that we needed to do. He was a blocker. He was the final signatory on things. He just would not sign things off. And he used to say, because there wasn't enough data, but it was effectively because he didn't really know what decision to make, and he didn't trust his own intuition. And we were making recommendations, and rather than back anything, he just made no decision at all. And I worked for him for 2 years. And literally, there was this indecision that was paralyzing the team, and we could not get things signed off. And over time, what happened was the business really suffered. The team suffered. We lost some really good people because of the situation. And he wasn't close enough to the details to make a decision, but he wouldn't actually make he wouldn't take a risk. He wouldn't make a decision. It was almost like doing nothing is better than making the wrong decision. I'm quite the reverse of that. I'd rather make a poor decision and move forward, learn quickly from your mistakes, pivot and change if you need to. And that's probably the most recent and the most relevant kind of experience I've had of micromanagement. I think it was, would you call it micromanagement? For me, it felt like it at times, because of the amount of workload. It just created loads of extra workload, and there was no trust. So that was my kind of experience. But I've also worked alongside managers who have just really struggled to make that transition from, they've been really good operators, whether that's in sales or other functions. They've been really good at what they do, and then they go into a management position, and they feel like their way is the best way or the only way. And so they then try and impart that or enforce that perhaps on their teams. And people are like, well, I was doing okay until you started trying to get me to change and do things your way. And then they get closer and closer to them until they almost suffocate people with the scrutiny and the reporting required and the changes required to act in a way that they think is appropriate. And so they're the two experiences. One was direct experience. The other was peers that I worked alongside, and their teams talking to my teams saying, oh God, it's hell in this business because I can't seem to make progress or get any trust in it. I think that's what people feel like. They're not trusted. So that's been my direct experience of it. But I'll talk about I'll just share some slides, and then we'll kind of have a discussion. We probably won't do breakout rooms this evening, because I don't think there's sufficient number of us this evening. So it'll be a kind of discussion session. Obviously, these workshops that we run each week are about creating some time to slow down and think. So hopefully tonight's about getting some thinking time. and appreciate you giving up your Thursday evening, or at least an hour of it, for this conversation. At least we won't be an hour, I don't think, this evening, but we'll cover what we need to. So we'll look at some of the causes. Why do people micromanage? We'll kind of talk about some experiences which we started to do around micromanagement, and then we'll look at coaching and how we change our approach towards a more coaching-based approach. And some of this will be natural, some of it might be useful just to think about principles for coaching our teams. And this probably it's really best encapsulated by this quote from Steve Jobs. It doesn't make sense to hire smart people and then tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they can tell us what to do. The reverse of my experience of this last role with this business director that I work for. But understanding why people micromanage is really, really interesting. The first, I think, and I've seen this over and over myself and with clients I work with, people who are really good at what they do tend to get promoted into leadership positions. So because you know how to do what your team are doing, if you're a salesperson, become a sales leader, good marketer, become a marketing leader, whatever function, good technical person, become a technical leader, you know what your team need to do. So because you know how to do it, you kind of think that it should be done that way. I think there's this, when we are individual contributors in a business, we get this sense of control. What we do determines the outcome of our results. When you move into a leadership position, that you get that separation between what you do and the results and the control. So I think a lot of managers find themselves thinking, well, how do I get the same sense of confidence and control I had when I was doing the job myself? And micromanagement is one way to get that sense of control. Standards is a big thing, how we do things. There's that phrase, how you do anything is how you do everything. I don't necessarily agree with that, but having this sense of standards and performance, and then I need you to do it my way to meet my standards is a real trap for people who find themselves in management positions, and not trusting people to do it either properly or the way you do it. That's a big cause around why people micromanage. And then delegation's an interesting one, letting go of things and being able to trust other people to get on with it and complete tasks. That's a huge kind of gap for a lot of people that haven't had the experience of doing that. And then, this isn't exhaustive, but then clients I work with, well, what else do I do? Not knowing how else to manage a situation and how else to get your team to be able to do what they need to get done. So there's some of the causes. And then the impact, there's lots of things, but it definitely increases stress. So it increases stress for not just the team, but also the person micromanaging, because all of a sudden you feel like you've got to get a grasp on so many more things than just your own job. You've then got to start dipping into other people's job. It definitely creates greater dependency. Once you start becoming the go-to person and you're really directive for your teams, that you set an expectation that people keep returning to. It definitely decreases morale. So people start to feel less appreciated. They feel less in control of their own positions. And that, of course, leads to engagement, so lower levels of engagement. People kind of tune out from the role and from responsibility. I've seen it impact performance. When I think about my own experience, it was interesting. That was the first time in my career when I had that experience of micromanagement that actually my performance dipped, and I've always been quite proud that I was, in that top 10%. It was like the identity and the work rate that I had. But through that process myself, I noticed my performance dipped, and it was almost unconscious. I didn't even realize it was happening until I look back and reflect on it. People tend to come up with less ideas, and there's less innovation in a team that is micromanaged, because those ideas don't tend to be accepted. They might have airtime, but they don't tend to get accepted or move forward. So people stop coming up with them. And of course, burnout is a real risk. And, when I think back to my experience, that is what happened to me. I ended up just kind of completely burnt out in that role, because it was almost like trying to do an impossible task when you can't get anything signed off. and you're coming up with all these different ideas, you're doing lots of reports, you're getting into you know the business inside and out, but you just can't get approval for anything. Even in it was a relatively senior business role, still felt, I guess, kind of helpless in terms of some of the decisions. You just couldn't get them approved. So you got this risk of burnout, and that's definitely a growing trend for people that are facing micromanagement. And of course, team turnover. I think we lost about 25% of our sales and marketing team throughout that period that I was in it, and that had been a very stable team up until that point. And it was this change of my manager impacted not just me, but all of the team that worked with me, because they could see the impact of it. So there's so many negative impacts of micromanagement. What's interesting is you get a few people, like small amount of people who actually, if they're not quite sure of what they're doing, actually they quite like the close scrutiny. It's quite it can be quite useful for them, but it's such a small percentage that it's almost negligible. You know, you're almost better off having those people into more regular one-to-ones and giving them the support and guidance that they need. So it's quite an interesting dilemma, I think, for businesses. And this week we ran a poll. So we had some really good engagement in the poll. And the question was, have you ever worked for a micromanager? What was it like? Yes, it was painful. So 83% said yes, and it was painful. 3% said yes, I quite enjoyed it. So they're the people that actually quite enjoy a bit closer scrutiny. Then we had 10% saying no, I've been lucky so far, a bit like you, Chris. And then 3% saying other in the comments and left comments. And some of the comments were interesting. So someone said, what was your experience? I just very quickly gave up, because why did I need to bother making much effort and using my brain and initiative? Another comment, I hated every minute and didn't stay there long as a result. So, staff churn and turnover. Someone else many years ago and absolutely hated it. In fact, all our team was micromanaged and it was non-productive. I have been micromanaged, but I blame the company for providing no formal management or leadership training. Someone else, not only was it micromanagement, it was chaotic micromanagement. So, people feeling as if there was not only close scrutiny, but constantly changing priorities. And then final comment, I hated being micromanaged. What's the point of hiring someone to do a job and then sit on their shoulder all day? Very much like the Steve Jobs quote. So interesting response, 149 votes and lots of comments on that particular post. So that was what we heard. And so we talked about this before we started, Chris. So you haven't had experience of it, but I'd be interested, what, in terms of your view on it, from what you've seen, why do you think this happens?
So I noticed George has got his hand up there, Justin.
George, are you there? George, can you hear me?
2 seconds, sorry, gents. I was on pure podcast mode rather than webinar mode.
Yes. So, that's okay, George. No worries. These sessions, we try to make them as a bit more interactive, so you get the chance to kind of engage and have a conversation. Did you have your hand up, George? Was there something you wanted to share?
That was by accident, but I am engaged. So.
Good man. Yeah. Can I come to you on that question then, George? What's your experience of micromanagement?
Well, some of the slides you shared 2 slides ago, what resonating with me, and there's almost sort of formed the logical argument to do it in a perverse way, if that makes sense. You can see why people fall into that trap. I can't say I've been micromanaged by an individual, but an individual has micromanaged me in certain time spans, if that makes sense. I wouldn't classify a manager as a micromanager, period, but they do fall into that trap, if we're going to call it that.
Yeah. So there'll be periods of time where perhaps that was the style.
Yeah, I think it does correlate with business needs as well, though, right? If you're running a heavy campaign or a new product launch, or you're behind target, these things that you shared on your slide deck do tend to pop up, unfortunately.
Yeah. There are times when we have to get closer to the team and get a better understanding of the activities that are going on if we need to see some performance improvement. Yeah.
So there we are.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, thanks, George. Good share. Chris, what about you? What are you, in terms of what I know you haven't experienced it, but have you seen,
No,
and what's your thoughts on it?
I actually think I'd take a step back from my earlier statement. Just listen to what you were saying about that experience. I never really thought about micromanagement in those terms. I always thought about it as telling somebody how to do the job, and making sure they're doing the job. Right down in the weeds with it. They're that top performer who moves into the sales management role, top salesperson into a sales management role. But yeah, I have experienced something very similar to what you were sharing. But as George said, it was a moment in time. There was a business problem. We didn't quite know how to work it out. And our leader at the time was micromanaging, I guess. And that had just had us all in a tailspin on a constant basis, with those changing priorities. And what about this? Should we do that? Let's try that. Oh, stop that. Right. Let's go and do this. But we never really had that as micromanagement, just had that as headless chicken management. But there we go.
Yeah, constantly changing and pivoting, and that can be exhausting for people to have to almost compute it.
John Moore.
Oh, hold on. We've just let somebody into. I've just let somebody into the room, so they've just joined us. Yeah, no, that's good. Thanks, Chris. You're right, and I think that term micromanagement, sometimes you perhaps you broaden the term or the reference for it, but for me it sits under that. When you're continually putting people under that unnecessary pressure, and you're directing them, pointing them, and almost scrutinizing, I think that that's the term micromanagement, and it does take a number of forms, I think. But to George's point's interesting. I don't know if you've read the book The New Leaders by Daniel Goleman, but it's interesting because Daniel Goleman is the architect of emotional intelligence. He's the guy that developed the whole framework and formula for emotional intelligence. And in that book, he also talks about 6 different leadership styles. And I won't go through all 6, but one of those leadership, so 4 of them are what he calls resonant leadership styles. They build trust, they build responsibility, they increase morale. And 2 of them are dissonant. So they cause disruption, disengagement. And the 2 that are dissonant are quite similar. So one of them is like the commanding style. So it's like, command and control. You'll do as I say, and you'll do it now. And there's no excuses. I'm not listening. There's no feedback. And what he says is, it's dissonant because it tunes people out, but it's useful in very small and specific circumstances. So if you need to turn a business around, or if you need to make immediate changes, or if you're performance managing somebody, then in those situations it can have its uses, but short, sharp bursts. And then the second dissonant leadership style he calls the pace setter. So it's the leader who is the high performer, who's like, work, we've got to get this done. Everything's quick, everything's urgent. They're constantly pivoting and changing, and they expect the team to just keep up. And both of those styles tend to burn people out and create this disconnection in culture. So his advice is, again, short, sharp bursts of this type of leadership style. Otherwise, you just lose people. And so it's kind of, for me, those are the 2. When I think of micromanagement, I think of those 2 dissonant leadership styles as being really kind of representative of how that plays out. So let me just quickly go over. So that's the problem. What do we do as a kind of potential alternative? So I'm a fan of coaching, and let's talk about where this fits with performance. So some of you may have heard of the eustress versus distress kind of principle. So this is about what we see in terms of people's performance and the pressure we apply as leaders. So I'll just share this with you as a kind of principle, because it's quite useful. So on this chart, you've got performance and purpose on the left, and you've got stress and pressure level across the bottom on the x-axis. And then we think about this curve of performance. So this is performance and purpose. This is stress versus pressure level. Too little stress and pressure on people, and clarity, if you like, means people are either bored or too calm to perform. Then we tip over onto the right-hand side, too much pressure and not enough performance and purpose, and we get people over into distress and potential anxiety. But there's this sweet spot in the middle called eustress. And we have to be careful with stress, because if people start to feel negative stress, either tip over into distress, it actually suppresses performance. And you can see that in the chart. And where we want to get to really is this, they call it the zone of optimal performance, where we get people into a positive eustress state. So the stress they experience is stress that's linked to them performing at a higher level, to them feeling purposeful and meaningful in terms of their work. And the pressure really does help them hit that zone of optimal performance. And what causes this? The causes in terms of our management and leadership style, we tend to find that people who are a bit absent in management, and this is quite a common trait. It's okay, that person's doing okay, I can leave them to it. You run the risk of them kind of dropping down this performance curve. Or the micromanager, who puts an undue amount of pressure and stress onto their teams. And really in the middle, where we want to get to is this, we call it the coaching leader. So someone who is close enough to the team, builds enough trust, is able to use a coaching style to get the team to build the responsibility for themselves, and really is just about helping them be accountable to the levels of performance that they're capable of. And that's the middle zone. And interestingly, when you look at I mentioned the New Leaders book, there are the 6 styles. I talked about the 2 resonance styles. There are 4 other, I talked about the dissonance styles. There are 4 other resonance styles. The one that underpins them all is the coaching leadership style. It's kind of the style that people can use to underpin all the other resonance styles. So coaching really does help us to get to that position. So I'll just share a couple of principles, then we'll discuss and kind of think about final actions. So where it fits in our model, and if you've seen this before, hopefully it's a good recap for you, but this is our coaching leadership model from the book Coaching Leaders. And we think about these 5 stages, and really where coaching fits is this coach for change. The precursor, it's worth mentioning, for people to be able to effectively lean into coaching, they have to trust the person that's coaching them. They have to trust that the questions being asked are questions that support them, not undermine them. And that's often a bit of a trap for us. They have to feel as if they've got an agreement in place with you to be able to receive coaching, get feedback, be open to it. They have to have some clarity over what they're trying to achieve, objectives and goals. And as leaders, we have to have the space to observe our teams in action, because that's what creates our awareness of where we can start to coach our teams to improve and change. So they're the kind of precursors. And then we go into coaching. So coaching for change, I think it's next week's session, we'll look specifically at coaching models. But tonight it's just about that awareness to switch our management style from directive to coaching. And the way to do it is to create a bit of space, question and listen. So question people, ask them empowering questions, and listen and create some space, because that tends to open people's minds to change, because they start to come up with answers for themselves. That's really what we want people to do. And for us, it's important because it gives us this chance to slow down, for our teams to open up, and for us to really start to think about seeking to understand, because everything we need our teams to kind of become aware of and realize in order for them to change is in their own mind, right? And there's only one way for us to get it out, and that's to ask questions, listen, and let them kind of explore it for themselves. And I always think about coaching as, in the short term, it's a slightly longer route, but in the long term, it's like a shortcut. So short term, it's a longer route round, but in the long term, it's a shortcut as a leader. And really what coaching is about building confidence and building trust in your teams, to provide them with both support and challenge, I think, support's really useful as a manager, but it's only one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is to constructively challenge people, to help them think differently and change perspectives. We do it through, questioning, listening, a bit of silence, sometimes some patience, and creating a bit of space, and really helping people to move from, a lot of people default to problems. And as leaders coaching, our job is to switch them to solution and outcome focus. What could we be doing instead? What's the obvious solution here? And really pulling, not pushing. So we might signpost people, but we don't tell them what to do. We might say, have you considered this? And if you were to consider that, what might that mean? That's a great way to introduce ideas, but then coach on it. And it really is about reflection and shifting perspectives. But also it's an opportunity to energize people, start to create greater belief in themselves, and really give them focus, clarity, and help them to think about the priorities. And it's interesting, I was running a program with a series of business leaders this week. And one of the challenges that came up for almost everybody in the room was getting stuck in the weeds with their teams bringing them continuously things that they really should have been capable of resolving for themselves. And as we started to delve into why that was happening, a lot of it is because the manager keeps giving them the answers. So you're creating a sense of dependency without realizing it, so creating focus, clarity, and helping people to prioritize back to what's the big picture for their role in the business and how that contributes. And then, of course, building personal responsibility and accountability and getting some kind of commitment to change, and then act in accordance with that change, not just, yeah, I will change, but actually see the action that follows changing. So that's really what it is. And of course, it's ongoing and continuous. That's the thing about coaching. It's not a one-time effect. It's not something we do once and it fixes people. So our coach for change, we think about how do we do it? We have to park ourselves and often park our input. So be prepared not to just share our ideas, to focus on the other person and not ourselves in the process, which can be difficult in itself. To remember the importance of trust, having a strong relationship, developing rapport as part of the conversation, slowing down and creating some space for that conversation, and asking questions, listening, and being prepared to challenge people's perspectives. And that's really important. And ultimately, instead of trying to perhaps press change from the outside in, to really think, how do I help this person to change from the inside out? That's the big thing. And if you've had a lot of experience of coaching, you'll know yourselves the impact that can have, the positive impact for people when they start to adopt this for themselves. And then final couple of things, and then we'll open it up to a quick discussion about what we think this means for us. When we think about, I love this quote from Lydia Kang. If there was one thing that made humans uncomfortable, it was silence. They didn't know what to do with it except to fill it with words that gave away their inner thoughts, an arsenal of useful information. I love that quote because the amount of time after I started to use a coaching approach, the amount of times where I either wanted to create some space or I was genuinely thinking in the silence and thought, right, where do I go next with this? And the other person keeps talking. Simply, almost like silence is as great a question as a question. And it's fascinating what comes out when you start to cultivate these periods of silence and space in conversations with your teams. And for those of you who are experienced at it, you'll be familiar with it and start to build it. But there's a lot of people that, and I find this interesting, I do a lot of sales-based development as well as leadership development. There's a real commonality, I think, in sales and leadership. And many people find themselves uncomfortable with a bit of silence, with some spaces of silence. And the more we do it, the easier it gets. And sometimes one of the things that I like to get people to consider is actually start to change in the relationship with silence. So instead of thinking about silence as being uncomfortable, recognize that when you feel even the discomfort that you feel, change the relationship with it. So recognize it is just a feeling, and you can breathe, relax, tell yourself to be calm, think about it as an opportunity for someone else to open up and be processing. And that really makes a difference. And if we start to think about ourselves and almost rehearsing, having those conversations, creating some space, creating some silence, and the more we do that, the easier it gets as we kind of create that space for our teams as well. So let me open it up to a conversation then. So we've talked about micromanagement and the challenges that presents. And then we've talked about the switch to coaching, creating some space, silence, questioning, listening. What's be interested to hear what's occurred for you as I went through those topics in that slide.
Okay, well, I'll add something if nobody else is going to speak.
I was going to say, Chris, it's down to you first, if you don't mind.
I'm more than happy to go last if George or Betty want to say anything. George?
Yeah, Chris.
Well done, George.
It's absolutely food for thought, but I guess it's finding the sweet spot of when to switch into the coaching mode as well.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you're managing your team, they're all going to be at different ages and phases of their career. And I know it's not one size fits all, but what I'm saying is, when do you employ the silence as a tool? When do you, because they need a certain amount of dependence on you for a certain amount of time, right? That's you can't dispute that. Otherwise, you're not doing to perhaps induct or have clear and concise targets and minimum standards and all that. So it's just about when to take the stabilizers off, really.
Yeah, I totally agree, George. And from your experience, how do you judge that at the moment? What's your approach?
It's trial and error.
Yeah.
But you don't really want to be making too many errors with whatever you do, particularly when it's at people's, it's too emotive and extreme to say careers at stake, but their performance and their job satisfaction certainly can be impacted positively and negatively.
Yeah.
So listen, that's more questions than answers.
That's useful, George. It's useful. I think about it. So when I run programs with groups, and this is, I guess, for me now as someone who does a lot of coaching and mentoring and training, I am quite deliberate about the approach I take, and I think about it in 4 quadrants. So I think this will be useful in terms of context of exactly what you just said, George. So I think there are times when people don't know the answers. And if you try and coach someone and they genuinely don't know the answer, they get quite frustrated. So in those situations where someone genuinely doesn't know, that for me, that's a training opportunity. You just need to train them in some key principles. Okay. And once they're trained, sometimes they go, okay, I get it, but I'm interested to know, how does that apply to my situation? And when you move from training, the next kind of style, if you like, or the next approach is to mentor. So mentoring is about sharing experiences, explaining how you've gone through similar things that might be in different contexts, and say, here's how I navigated it. And then from there, people can go, okay, so if I apply what you've just said to my own situation, what that means is I could potentially do X, Y, and Z, right? So they can then overlap it or overlay it onto their own situation. And from there, from that, so training, mentoring, the third style then is to say, absolutely. So tell me more about what you're thinking. How does that apply and what are you going to do with it? That's a transition into coaching, right? So we then coach people so they start to translate it from theory, your experience, to how I'll apply it. And so they're the 3 predominant styles, kind of one-to-one. And then I think of a 4th style, which is when we're leading teams, and that is facilitating. So you might share principles and then you say to the team, okay, what do we think? What's your experience? What as a team can we learn from what we've just covered? And then, the team will share their ideas and contributions, and the team then learn from each other. And for me, if you think about those four, you can't go far wrong if you pivot and
Framework.
utilize all four of those styles. Yeah.
A good framework. I think, the facilitating point you make is a interesting one because, and you alluded to, we're all salespeople to a point, but they're facilitators, and then the relationship with putting the onus on other people and silence and being a people pleaser is another difficult one to crack, I suppose, as a facilitator.
Yeah. And sometimes that requires, you might dip in and out of, again, those different styles. If you're, if you are facilitating and either, I don't know, the wrong ideas are coming up, or people are, not able to share exactly what's going on, you might just have to dip into some principles again and maybe flex between the other styles. But it's predominant when I'm running sessions like that, when I'm working with clients, that tends to be in my mind. Is this, and I will, I don't always get it right. It's trial and error, George, to your point, but I'll dip into each of those different styles to enable me to get the result that the group or the individual needs.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Really useful conversation. Yeah, thanks, George. Thanks for sharing that. It's good. That's good. Thank you. Betty, you are in the group. Betty, are you there? Testing my own comfort with silence at the moment. Betty, are you with us?
I am here.
Betty, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Betty, did you catch some of that?
Yeah, I came in a bit late, but I did catch most of what you were saying.
Right.
So are you coaching dental practices?
So I'm coaching businesses. I have got some dental practice clients, but I work inside and outside of dentistry, Betty. Yeah. You're in dentistry, Betty?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
The problem is, in dentistry, you have to almost micromanage. That's the problem. You have to. How do you actually do it? Not micromanaging.
Yeah. Betty, are you a principal?
Yes.
Yeah. So tell us a bit about your experiences, and so if you think about situations, what situations do you find yourself having to micromanage?
Basically, I mean, it's, as a dentist, you normally work one-to-one. You don't work, your team is out in the front desk, and then you work one-to-one with your nurse. And I mean, you can't. She'll have to give you what you need at that instant. So that's micromanaging, isn't it?
I think certainly in those early interactions where you're really trying to work out, how do you best work together one-to-one, you've got to give a lot of direction to make sure that your nurse really understands what you're looking for and starts to respond accordingly. I guess the question is, over time, how does your nurse start to preempt some of those procedures, some of the certain patients that are booked in, and actually where's the transition between you feeling as if you have to micromanage the nurse versus having a conversation with the nurse about, here are the types of procedures that we do together with patients. Here are some of the standard operating procedures that we have, and actually starting to prepare and getting the nurse to think, right, actually, I'm going to look at our appointment schedule for the day. I'm going to start to preempt some of the things that Betty needs me to do, so that you don't feel like you're constantly having to ask and give, that micromanagement or clear direction.
Well, she's got checklists.
Okay.
Goes through, so she knows exactly what to put out. That's not. Yep. But I don't know how it's going to help me in my situation. How your coaching is going to help me.
I would say it's more about your conversation, Betty, with the nurse to start to talk about how you might make that transition so that you don't feel as if you're micromanaging, because what that sounds to me as if it causes for you is you have to do your job and you have to think about the job she has to do. Is that kind of how you find it?
No, she's actually really good.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been working with my nurse for over 12 years, so she's really. But if I have to get a new nurse, then it's all upside down. You know, if she's on holiday or something.
Yeah. And if it's short interventions, then you might find you have to get closer to that person. But the whole, I guess what we're trying to explore tonight is that whole principle of being able to switch from feeling as if we have to micromanage and be really close to people to actually starting to have those coaching conversations where we encourage people to start to think more proactively, start to think for themselves, and build up this independence and sense of responsibility that they take control for it, rather than us feeling always as if we have to set the direction.
I was just wondering what you offer, what kind of coaching you offer for dentists. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Well, a lot of the work that I do tends to be leadership based. So the programs that we run are either sales programs where we're teaching people how to have sales conversations, or they tend to be leadership based conversations where we go through, how do you start to coach your teams instead of being too directive and manage, being almost feeling as if you have to manage them and get close to them. And it's a series of workshops that we run with different leaders. Some of them will be from dentistry, but some of them will be from outside of dentistry. So you get that blend of experience of people that are, similar to you, but also people who are running different types of businesses and teams, because often there's value in that experience that you learn from people who aren't even in the same sphere as you. And there are, a bit like I talked about before, styles. As you start to learn those kind of mentoring and facilitating experiences, gives you ideas that perhaps you wouldn't have thought of if you were just in a room with people that were doing the same thing as you. So happily I'll drop you some information offline, Betty, if you are interested. I'll happily share that with you. But thanks. Okay. Yeah, thanks for the conversation. That's good.
That'll be great.
Yeah, pleasure. Thanks, Betty. Chris, how about you? What were you thinking as we were going through that?
Yeah, just scribbled a couple of things down. You touched on the main part to me, and that's the difference between the coach, the mentor, and the manager. And the three are not interchangeable. Now, I see them interchanged all the time, and no. You're one or the other, and you've got to be very clear about that. And the thing you didn't touch on, you did mention it very briefly, is that I think the piece that gets missed the most is the contracting, the agreement up front, that real clarity about this is a coaching session, this is the role I play, this is what you need to bring, being that open mind and that ready for this conversation. I think that's incredibly important. And I have sat in, observed some of my managers in coaching sessions and no contracting at the beginning. Drives me berserk. But they know why they're here. Okay.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Chris. And for George and Betty, who perhaps haven't heard that term before, you saw it on the coach model that we used, and it's almost the foundation for the conversation, isn't it? And the term is called contracting. And in professional coaching, it's the first stage of the relationship with either a client or your team, which is just to agree those kind of standards, boundaries, the working relationship, the interaction between you and the team, so that you're agreeing things up front, so that as and when you might have to have difficult conversations or move into, whether it's performance management or closer expectation setting, then you've agreed up front how you'll do that with your team member. That the term is contracting. It's really useful because it opens the door to much better leadership. and acceptance from your teams. So yeah, that's really a good reminder. Yeah, thank you, Chris. And that very often will open the door to coaching, allows you to have those much more constructive and positive coaching conversations. Yeah, very good. Thank you. Excellent. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, George, Betty. Any more thoughts on this evening's session? Anything else that struck you or that you'd like to pick up on this topic of whether it's micromanagement or starting to coach?
No, not for me.
No.
No, really useful. Thanks, Justin.
Pleasure. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, George.
Thank you.
Oh, great. Thanks, Betty. Excellent. Well, so we run one of these every week. Normally they're on a Friday morning. This evening was a switch because I'm out literally yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So I thought I'll do it this evening instead. But normally they're Friday mornings. So next Friday morning we will be back, and we'll be talking specifically. So we talked about the principles of coaching. There are some kind of models around coaching and some specific skills that we can develop to help us to coach. We'll be covering those next Friday morning. So if you are interested in that, then do feel free to join us. I'll send you details out on email as well. Final thing before we close this evening, and that's an offer I make to people who join us for these sessions. So let me just share my screen. Yeah, this is a reminder to me that hopefully you've enjoyed this evening's session. There'll be some things that hopefully have got you thinking differently. I would encourage you, because enthusiasm, like anything and in anything, has a half-life. We tend to have good ideas and then it kind of wanes. Just to schedule maybe 10-15 minutes in your diary over the next couple of days, just to think, right, what will I do as a result of the session from this evening? It might be one or two things that you just need to make a change on. Just make a note in your diary so that becomes something that you can act on over the next couple of days. And if anybody would like to book a one-to-one session with me, as I say, I open this up to people who join these calls each week. I'm an accredited executive coach. I have coaching conversations, I was going to say almost every day. Every day I have some form of coaching conversation because there's a lot going on. So I would love to extend a coaching session to you. So I'm just going to put that in the chat right now. And that is a link to my diary. So that will get you access to my calendar. You'll see there's lots of options, probably over the next, won't be this week, but probably next week, there'll be some slots. If you'd like 45 minutes, it's a pure coaching session. So it's your agenda. It's not my agenda, it's yours. And what we cover is really simply, where are you right now? What are you working on? What are your challenges or opportunities? Where would you like to be in the future? That might be 12 months out or longer. And then what are the changes and key actions you need to take to get there? And it sounds really simple. These are questions we don't often ask ourselves. So it's quite a nice opportunity just to park yourself, get an external view. I talked about those kind of three styles. It's kind of trainer, mentor, coach. So if there are things that we go through in that session and you aren't completely clear or you'd like some ideas or input, I'm happy to share some of my experiences as well. So it can be quite a useful conversation. So feel free, if you'd like to take me up on that. That's a coaching session on me. And I'll just close now and say final thing. Anybody have any final questions for this evening, or anything you'd like to bring up before we close? Any final questions or final?
Justin, just a point. Could you drop that link into a LinkedIn inbox for me, please? Is that okay?
Yeah, of course, George. Yeah, no problem at all. While I'm online, I'll do it before I close. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, pleasure. Thanks, George. Yeah, thank you for coming. Chris, George, Betty, thank you for investing an hour of your Thursday evening. It's been great to see you. I really appreciate it. I will send you an email first thing tomorrow morning with a link to the recording of tonight's session in case there's anything you want to go over or share with anybody. And I'll send you the slides from this evening as well, so you've got those for reference.
That's helpful. Feel free to edit my bits out, but I will be spreading the good word.
Thank you.
No editing required, George. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Lovely to see you all. Thanks everybody for hanging on to the end as well.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. And I look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Betty. Thanks, George. See you
Thank
later.
you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.